everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch Project, the first and only program which is dedicated exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Welcome to the Fourth Branch Program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch Program. Welcome. Today is Saturday, January 26, 2019. The country has been in a very tumultuous state for the past 2 years. And we have been saying all along that our democracy is in jeopardy, in serious jeopardy. It is not because the country is at war. It is not because the enemy has overpowered our system of government. The problem is within. There are two major factors which have contributed to the serious problem that we have in the country. And those two problems have helped to the erosions of our democracy. Today, we will talk about those two problems. We will debate one of them at length, and we will touch on the other. And obviously, with this program, we will continue to talk about any aspect of any issue in the country that contributes to diminish our way of life, that contributes to make our way of life much more difficult. Stay with me as we will delve very shortly in those very problems which constitute very huge issue for our democracy. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies presented to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. United States, there are two major problems which have plagued the country for many decades, centuries even. Racism, discrimination, and a cultivation of ignorance. Today we are not going to spend too much time talking about ignorance. Our main focus today is racism. But let me take a minute to quickly address ignorance. First, it is important to mention that no man is born ignorant. Well, actually, all men are born ignorant. Marcus Cicero said that. And second, mostly Republican legislators, elected officials, trade almost exclusively in ignorance vis-a-vis their constituent. And number three, organizations such as Fox, Breitbart, InfoWars, and individuals such as Rush Limbaugh and Coulter and Company rely exclusively on the ignorance of their viewers and their listeners to make a living. And four, most Republicans are gullible and naive. We talk about that problem at length here on the Fourth Branch. For those of you who have joined for the first time, I strongly encourage you to visit the People Branch YouTube channel and search for the title, Are Republicans Dumber Than Democrats? And there you'll find a number of videos in which we discuss the detail of the problem and the roots of the problem and whether there is even a remedy for that problem. Now, when we talk about ignorance, we're not talking about people without college education. Donald Trump is president of the United States, not just because a few uneducated, illiterate people who didn't go to college voted for him. Of course not. Donald Trump is president because millions of people, including those who went to college, those who have, well, they told me, a PhD, decided that was the best course of action for the country. I wonder if they still believe that's the case. That aside, I do make a difference between ignorance and stupidity. You see, all men are born ignorant according to Marcus Cicero, which is logical, obviously. You weren't born with knowledge of anything. You have to learn everything in life. So, yes, all men are born ignorant. But stupidity actually is a cultivation of ignorance. In other words, you decide to be ignorant. You deliberately decide to be and stay ignorant. You see, in the Republican circle, there is an explanation for any act of ignorance, for any behavior of ignorance, for any statement of ignorance. Instead of admitting, accepting, and change course, you will find that most Republicans trade in ignorance, and the reason is very simple. It is difficult for anyone to accept wrongdoing, to accept having been mistaken, and to accept the fact that they made the wrong decision, the wrong choice. But instead of admitting it, they would argue to the death that their decision is better, their choice is better than the alternative. There is one major factor which differentiates a human being, us, the human species, from all other animal species, is the ability to reason. Now, outside of that, there is really absolutely no difference between a human and any other animal species. And one of the most important aspects of being able to use our brain is to be able to rationalize and understand when we're wrong, and change course. Now, it shouldn't be a matter for me because it doesn't matter whether you're ignorant or not. But as I mentioned several times, your ignorance, the ignorance of one voter, say JFK, impairs the security of us all. In other words, somebody's ignorance could jeopardize my life, the lives of many, even a nation. You see, ignorance is not a virtue, it's not a badge to wear. It is a very heavy burden on families, and it is completely useless to society. So there is no reason for anyone to cling to ignorance. But what makes it even more difficult for Republicans in general to get rid and move away from ignorance is the fact that the Republican legislators, elected officials, the pundits like Fox, Breitbart, InfoWars, Rush Limbaugh, and Coulter, all the individuals that they look up to provide them with information, deal exclusively in ignorance. Not only they have the ignorance of their own, but they make a living out of the ignorance of their viewers, of their listeners. Put differently, if the Republican constituent, if the Republican viewers and listeners are not ignorant, gullible, and naive, those people would not be able to make a living because they rely on that very fact. Picture this for a moment. From 2009 all the way to 2014, 15, there were more than half of the Republican constituent who continued to believe that Barack Obama was not American. Now, you call it whatever you want, you explain it whatever you want, but it is ignorance. But the problem for the Republican constituent is the fact that they listen to people who do not know any better, who cannot know any better, but most specifically, who rely on their ignorance to continue to make a living. As such, they have no incentive not to continue to lie to their viewers, to their listeners. As far as the Republican legislators, elected officials, they rely on the ignorance, on the gullibility and the naiveness of the constituents to keep their job. Picture this, for instance. During the whole 8 years of Obama, Republicans tried 52 times to repeal Obamacare. They gave all kind of reason for that. It was a death panel. It will kill jobs. It's not good for you. It's bad. It's this and that and the other. And all the constituents went along with it, knowingly that, well, they believe their legislators know better, right? But all that time, their legislators were trading in their ignorance. How can I possibly know that? In the midterm 2018, all of those were up for re-election, proposed exactly the same thing that they've been fighting for 8 years to repeal. If it were bad then, what makes it good now? The answer is rather simple. They were all trading in the ignorance of their constituent. As such, it is of extreme importance to the nation to realize that half the country, millions of people, live in complete ignorance, in complete darkness. And what makes it even worse is the fact that both their legislators, representatives, and also people they look up to, such as Fox, deal exclusively in ignorance because all of those parties cannot survive without the ignorance of their listeners, of their viewers, of their constituents. Put differently, our country is in serious trouble. I'll be right back.
In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today,
with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies presented to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. War on Blacks is a topic which discusses race relations in America. If you have joined us for the first time, welcome. Now, this is a very difficult topic to discuss, but most importantly, it's a very difficult issue to resolve in the country. The reasons are not simple, but we will strive as best as possible to explain the roots of the problem, to expose those who are fueling racism, discrimination still in the country, in the hope that we will be able to eradicate this plague from the nation. War on Blacks is not a topic to bash whites. Now, I had to say that because I have received a number of comments. A number of people decided one way or another whether they haven't watched the program or they don't have an understanding as to what the objective is. So I understand their comments may be out of line, out of focus. So today, let me set the stage. If you have not watched this program, I strongly encourage you to head to the People Branch YouTube channel. There you will find several videos, plenty of video already produced about this very topic. We provided a basis for this conversation. At this point in the conversation, we are talking about slave trade, but more specifically, the rebellions. But let's do a recap for those who have not watched this program or those who have misunderstanding of what the objective of the program is. We did not choose the label or the banner War on Blacks to sensationalize the topic. We use it specifically to point to a very big problem: casualties. As you know, if there is a war, there are casualties. Now, the casualties usually occur in both sides of the war. But with War on Blacks, the casualties have been one-sided. Physical casualties on blacks, emotional casualties, psychological casualties, and financial casualties. We will, of course, explain all those in detail. Now, we also set two very important bases for this conversation. The first one is we know, we acknowledge, and we understand that there are two very major groups of whites in the country. Millions who are racist, who discriminate, and millions of others who are not racist, who do not discriminate. This is a wide acknowledgement discussing this topic. So we are not naive to know or to think that all the white individuals in the country are racist. We have been talking about that even during slavery. It was always that way. What we just mentioned, that there were always two groups of whites, those who had the understanding that slavery was bad, were disgusted by it, and of course those who benefited of it and who would do anything and everything to keep slavery around. And as we continue this conversation, I will also show you that those people, their descendants, are still fighting up to today to keep things in such a way that blacks continue to be disadvantaged in the country. But first, that was the first part. The second part is we also acknowledge that no one living today was around during slavery. Whether you're black or white, we know that it's really impossible for any one of those individuals to still be around. End of slavery officially occurred in 1865. So it's highly unlikely that any one individual would still be alive who was part, whether it was the slave owners or the slaves. Now, those are the two important bases to remember, to keep in the forefront of your mind. Now, in order to solve any problem, we have to first acknowledge the problem and understand the problem. Now, whatever the problem is, and we talked about that, there are three major important factors to bring into any conversation about solving problem. One, the problem has to be acknowledged, identified, so to speak. Two, the problem has to be understood. And three, the concerned parties have to communicate. Now, you may remember Ebola a few years ago. Ebola, of course, no one had to force or even suppose that people didn't know about Ebola at that time. It was widespread, worldwide. So the acknowledging part was already well established. Now, the scientific community had to race in order to remedy the problem, because they had to understand the disease, the illness, how it spread, who were most prone to catch the disease, how it was spread around, and so on and so forth. So once they got an understanding of Ebola, they were able to produce a cure. But even with all those two factors taken care of, without the parties, the concerned parties communicating, Ebola would still be around. In other words, people were affected, people were exposed, people who could be in danger. If none of those people were coming forward to say, yes, he is the problem, I may be infected or may be affected, I know someone who is, then the disease would have continued to spread. Now, if we transpose that analogy to racism, discrimination, race relation in America, we cannot solve that problem unless all the three factors are present. One, we ought to acknowledge that there is a problem. Racism is widespread in America, not just the white nationalists or the white supremacists. Now, I must say, most of the individuals who are racist, who discriminate, they take great comfort in knowing that there is that extreme group, the white nationalists or the white supremacists or the KKK, to simply hide behind those people and think, oh, those people are the racists. As I mentioned here, several times, those small groups, they are not the problem in the country. Because if they were, we would not have a racism and discrimination problem. Because there are not that many of those people in the country. And yet, racism, discrimination is rampant in the country. So we cannot fault those people. We cannot put that problem on the white nationalists. You go and apply for a job. At the bottom of the application, whether it's online or a hard copy, it says EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity Organization. All across the nation, you will not get an application that doesn't say that. And yet, at the workplace, everywhere you turn, no matter which job, no matter which company, you have race problem. So if indeed all the companies are EEOO, then we should not have that problem at the workplace, should we? Of course not. And the reason is because those who are racist, who practice discrimination, they hide behind a lot of things. They hide behind the white nationalists. They hide behind subtle ways of discriminating. They are, in a sense, cowards. I mentioned before, I would prefer to deal with a white nationalist because I know where they stand, because they will tell you exactly where they stand. They don't like blacks. That's as simple as that. So you know, if you were to walk into a place where it belongs to white nationalists, you know if you're black, you have no business there. But because most people who are racist, most whites who are racist, who discriminate, they are subtle. They don't say that. They pretend not to be. And yet it's widespread in the country. If that weren't the case, then this very conversation we would not have to have. In other words, the racists, those who discriminate, they are cowards. They do not have the courage to accept, to admit, to acknowledge that they are racist, but the most important, they do not have the decency to work towards getting rid of that sentiment. They are, by any stretch of your imagination, cowards. But we cannot fold them all together because their sentiment didn't just spring out of nowhere. We know that. No man is born racist. All men are born ignorant, but no man is born racist. So how did they come to have a sentiment, a racist sentiment? And that's what we're here to talk about. Again, I'd like to point out that this program is not a program to bash whites. This is not our objective. Our objective is to explain the roots of racism and discrimination in the country and to expose those who continue to practice it in the hope that we can eradicate the problem in the nation. That's the ultimate objective of the program, of this particular topic. So this is not a white bashing focus. This is not for those who are sending comments and inappropriate comment, I would say. It is not necessary because the ultimate objective is to perfect the union. And the only way to do that is to remove ignorance out of the equation. And one of the biggest problems this country is facing is racism, discrimination. And because of my personal interaction with individuals who say or do things that clearly tells me it's out of ignorance, I found it necessary to have this particular debate, this particular discussion in order to educate. Because once you understand where this problem comes from, maybe it will be easier to work on the sentiment that is negative towards blacks in general, minority in particular.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
How is it possible that in the midst of 21st century, here in America, a country which has people from all over the world of different races, culture, languages, racism is still widespread? Now, both blacks and whites have been responsible for the state of affairs in the country. And I said that because both sides have been trying to work around the very core of the problem. When there is a problem that is caused by a white nationalist, at least someone who identifies himself as white nationalist or white supremacist or KKK or any other such extreme group, whites are elated, especially those who are racist. And blacks use that opportunity to point to, see, racism in the country. And both sides miss the whole point. Because the white nationalists, the white supremacists, the KKK, or any such small group, they do not represent the big problem of racism and discrimination in the country. I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again. If my neighbor next door, who is white, doesn't like me, it doesn't impact me. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't do anything to me. As such, I wouldn't care. If I meet someone on the train, at the school, at the workplace, no matter where I meet an individual who is racist, doesn't have any effect whatsoever on me. What does, however, is what we call institutionalized racism. Institutionalized racism is a system that is put in place that nurtures, that condones, and that even promotes racist behavior, action, and languages. That is what I am concerned about, and that's what every black and every decent white individual should be concerned about. It's institutionalized racism. I gave example of that before, but as we're moving away from slavery, we're almost there because we are inching towards the Civil War. But before we get there, I have to make the point that institutionalized racism is still around and was set by those slave owners, by those who condone slavery, pro-slavery if you like. Those individuals, they were all whites, and they all contributed to set a system in place which continue to be disadvantageous to blacks. And this is not a story. This is documented this is a historical record that slavery, as you may recall, there were just whites who were slave owners. And beyond slavery, those same individual whites were responsible, were at all levels of everything in society. No matter where you turn, whites were responsible for. Whether it's the Justice Department, the Supreme Court, the government, etc., etc. No matter where you look, they were just white. And because most of those individuals, they were not happy with the idea of end of slavery, they set a structure in place to make sure that blacks beyond slavery continue to struggle. And as when we finally leave slavery behind, we will show you how even today those who are racist, who have the racist tendency, inclination, they continue to, not only they still in very powerful position in the government, and they continue to set, to enforce, to establish rules, guidelines, regulations that help perpetualize institutionalized racism. We will expose those individuals because the whole point is to make certain that everyone in society understands who are behind this problem in the midst of the 21st century in America. Now, the slavery aspect of why we get there is the following. I'm not going to discuss everything that I already discussed before because I mentioned it. There are plenty of videos that provide the various aspects of time during slavery that help to understand why we at, and as to the progression of that problem. The only thing I'm going to mention in passing is during slavery, white slave owners, they were monsters by every definition. Towards blacks, they did things that today would get you to shed tears, even reading about it, let alone if you were to be their witnesses or if you were to be the victim, the subject of those treatments. Inhuman treatment beyond words. Unfortunately, if you are white and you are descendant of slave ownership, you were passed not just wealth, because remember, blacks were slaves, the white slave owners used them to enrich themselves, to get houses, lands, businesses. They got great life. They sent their kids to school, got a good education. Blacks in the meantime, 4 centuries of slavery. They didn't have that opportunity. Now, as things were changing gradually, because you have to acknowledge or understand that if you put someone in a predicament, as the white slave owner did to blacks, they work them 18 hours. Now, I completely bypass the process from taking them from Africa and putting them in human condition at the bottom of a boat to sell them across the world. But here in America, the white slave owners work slave 18 hours a day, non-stop. If a slave were to just even feel tired, that slave would get beat until he bled. And after that beating, he would have to go back to the field to continue to work with his back bleeding under either scorching sun or chilling cold. It didn't matter, because as far as the white slave owners were concerned, and those are the people that you, if you are a descendant of slave ownership, information were passed to you and tell you that your ancestors were good people. They starved blacks to death because they weren't fed regularly like they were feeding their families. And of course, you can understand if you're working under the scorching sun or the cold without proper attire, proper dress, and you're not being fed, yes, you will feel hungry at some point. So yes, from time to time, blacks will try to steal some food, if you want to call that stealing, and eat. And if the white slave owners found out, they would starve those people to death. And if they try to escape, which many of them did, they would hunt them down like animals. If they could not be captured, they would be shot and killed on sight. If they are captured, they would be put through torture that only the devil would be able to relate. Yes, the slave owners, your ancestors, they were monsters. They were not good people. I want to make that crystal clear. The information that you were passed down to tell you that your ancestor, whoever he was, good slave owners, they say he was a good slave owner, he treated slaves well. That was pure lie. There was no slave owner who could be called good. Now, we will get to the part where there were, I'm not sure if I call them slave owners, because those were domestic slaves, like women and children that worked exclusively in the household as household slaves. They weren't in the field. They were just household. Yes, they beat them anytime that they wanted, which was not as often as those in the field, for good reason, because those people learned what the master liked, what the master wanted, and they did comply. The women slaves were raped at will by the slave owners, and they had no say or no choice over that. So no matter which way you take it, no matter which part of the slavery you take, the slave owners were not good people. They were monsters. Now, for a time, the slaves, there were many uprisings. Uprisings started as soon as they started to shuttle slaves here in America. The first shipment of slaves here in America happened in 1619, Jamestown, Virginia, which was at that time a British colony. And in 1662, that's just 40 years later, there were already uprising, revolt. Yes, for those who were asking the question, How come blacks didn't do anything? Yes, blacks were fighting against what they were being subjected to from the time that whites were picking them up, rounding them up in Africa. They were fighting against it. They didn't just sit, cross their arm and think, oh, great, we're going to be slaves. I call those people asking the question, number one, ignorant, and number two, blaming the victim. Because those individuals who are incapable of either grasping history or incapable of accepting what happened was bad and it happened, their ancestors may have been responsible for it, instead of accepting history and try to do better, now they try to blame the victim, the blacks. Oh, well, they could have escaped. And they tried. Many lost their lives escaping. And all the revolts, all the uprising that happened, a lot of them lost their lives. Now, the part that I want to bring to your attention in order to understand the sentiment that whites nurture towards blacks, one, they thought, well, slaves were forever because slaves give them a way to become rich without spending money, because they weren't taking care of the slave, because slaves were easy to acquire. It was cheap. So they couldn't care less about feeding the slave, clothing the slave, because to them that was property. That only treatment were to mistreat them. So white slave owners enriching themselves. They own land, houses, businesses, all on the backs of the blacks. They were mistreated. And for centuries, hundreds of thousands of blacks lost their lives pushing back, revolting, uprising. There were many. According to historical record, by the time that Abraham Lincoln signed the executive order for the Emancipation Act, there were at least 250 uprisings. Not all of them were of the same size or the same success, but blacks were revolting. And the reason there were not even more than 250 is because whites took a number of precautions. First, blacks were usually chained together, which means all of those chained blacks had to agree to do something in order for it to happen. Now, try to make that happen. Look at Washington. Those people are not chained. They can't even agree on the most basic things of government. Two, each one of those people had different focus and different reason to stay or be alive. Some have families, and they believe that at some point they'll be able to see their kids, their wives. Of course, not knowing that will never happen. Others, they had siblings, and they didn't want to do something if the siblings didn't want to participate and put the sibling lives in jeopardy. So there were many reasons why blacks did not just every single day decided to do things that the white slave owners couldn't accept. But most importantly, the white slave owners used to do something that was a psychological warfare on blacks. They used to punish those who revolted, who pushed back publicly. They hung them publicly. They executed them publicly. It's just a way to tell the others, this is what's going to happen to you too. So the idea of those ignorant individuals who come and ask the question, why did blacks stay slaves for that long? My answer to you is, go and read history, because you need to. This is not a history class. The only reason we're talking about that aspect is to explain racism in America. But you need to get a good understanding of the period of slavery to see what all the things that were happening during that time. So blacks weren't sitting still and think, oh my God, I'm slave. This is great. I can't wait to wake up the next day again. Now, the treatments those blacks were being put through make it certain that no one would have just simply do nothing. So they did. Every now and then there were groups of black uprising, pushing back, and of course, needless to point out that every time that they did that, there were harsh punishment on those blacks. Hung, executed. Now, that started to happen from the very beginning of slavery. In 1800, there was, in 1775 rather, there was the first organized slavery escape was done by Gabriel Prosser. He was a slave. He was born in 1775, in slavery, of course, and he tried to organize in 1800. He was just 24, 25 years old. And he managed to get a group of blacks to go along with the plan. Now, I say that and I'll say it again. All the uprising, most of them were disorganized. There was nothing that blacks did to harm the white slave owners. All they were doing is trying to escape slavery. Yes, in the process, sometimes they burned the plantation that white slave owners consider, the hell with those blacks. They burned my business. So they consider that an affront. But at no point that blacks who tried to escape slavery did try to physically harm whites. Every time that you read that there was a revolt, an uprising, the objective was to escape slavery. As you might imagine, none of those succeeded, because every time, remember, in the South, there was no place for them to turn. There was no place for them to hide, because no matter where they went, if they're not slaves in a particular plantation for a particular white, they had no business being there. And that might be a familiar sound to you, because there are still in the United States of America today that places that it's like blacks are not supposed to be there. See, nothing has changed. Side note, we'll get to that later. So, all those disorganized escape fell. Now came Gabriel Prosser, who said that we're finally going to do it. We will organize. And we're not just going to escape slavery, because we know that in the North, blacks are more or less welcome. Not that there was no slavery in the North. There was slavery, but it was not widespread as it was in the South. In the North, blacks were looked at differently to a certain degree because of that very predicament. The slavery was not widespread in the North. So blacks in the South know that if they escape and they reach the North, they have more or less a chance of not only not being slaves, but also being able to meet and maybe strategize with other blacks in the North and do something about slavery. Gabriel Prosser tried to organize, and he did. He didn't go far because there were two slaves who got cold feet. They were afraid. Remember, I was telling you each slave had a different reason for not really wanting to escape or not willing to go ahead with a plan, because they had different focus. And that made it difficult for slaves to succeed at the very onset of slavery. So those two slaves got cold feet. They relate the fact to the master, who related to authority. Gabriel Prosser, along with all the others, were caught, publicly executed. That was 1800. In 1822, there was another gentleman by the name of Denmark Vesey. He was a slave before. After 20 years, he purchased his freedom. He too was a slave leader. He organized an escape. And according to historical record, he managed to do really much better than Gabriel Prosser, because he managed to get up to 9,000 blacks to join the escape. That was an army, 9,000 people, and they weren't just in one location, in one plantation, in various areas, which means if he succeeded, it would have been the greatest success of escape, and I would venture to say that could have put an end to slavery before Abraham Lincoln. Because 9,000 people who want their freedom, fighting against those who want to keep them slaves, I guarantee you white would have lost. But unfortunately, two slaves got cold feet, reported to the masters, and again, authorities were alerted. In that time, they had armed personnel surrounding those you call leaders, Denmark Vesey and all the other leaders. And they captured them. 37 of them, including Mark Vesey, Mark Vesey did manage to escape to Norfolk and hid there for several weeks. But they ultimately found him. They tried him and they publicly executed them all. Now, I don't know if you're watching or following. Those people, they had one thing in mind: escape slavery. They didn't want to harm anyone, not even the white people who were inflicted those kind of harsh, inhuman punishment on them. They didn't have that in mind at all. The only thing they wanted is escape and move north. But the white slave owners say, no way. Now, I want you to transport yourself back to that time and tell me, if you were to be in that predicament, what would you do? Now, the third person that came to organize was someone by the name of Nat Turner. Now, Nat Turner had a childhood, a very bad childhood. He was sold as a baby, and later on sold as a young child, and later on again sold as a young man. He was, remember, blacks were merchandise. So the first master who purchased him as a baby waited a few years and figured, I don't really need more slaves, I'll just sold him for a profit. And so they did. And again they did. No, those are the white slave owners who later on will label blacks as violent and criminal. And notice I just gave you two examples. In both instances, those blacks simply wanted to escape slavery. They get caught and they get executed. But blacks are violent, they're criminals. And it so happened that those whites that were doing that, they were good people. You know, they went to church, they had a family, they went to school. But they executed blacks for trying to escape slavery, but blacks are criminals. Blacks are violent. The irony of life in the United States for blacks. Now, Nat Turner happened to be of a different breed. Remember I just mentioned to you, he was sold as a baby, as a young child, and as a young man. And his last master was John Travis. That's why it's his last master, yes, was John Travis. Now, Nat Turner had a different plan. He wanted to escape slavery. He was a slave leader. We had one, Gabriel Prosser in 1800, Denmark Vesey in 1822. Both of them, along with those who wanted to escape, got caught and executed publicly. Nat Turner was born in 1800. Actually, Nat Turner wasn't born in 1800, getting to think about it. Denmark Vesey, well, Nat Turner was born in 1800, so was John Brown. I'm thinking of those two individuals. John Brown is white, Nat Turner is black. So both of them were born in 1800, but both of them were anti-slavery. Well, Nat Turner, for good reason, he was a slave. So Nat Turner had a different idea about escaping slavery, because he learned that Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey were both caught escaping and executed publicly. So Nat Turner decided, we're going to escape. We have a plan. But before escaping, we're going to give the white slave owners a taste of their own medicine. So Nat Turner went and killed John Travis and the whole family. Now the other slaves who were with Nat Turner decided, hey, we're going to do that too, because those people, they weren't good people. Let's just kill them all. So they went and killed their masters and family. So it was a massacre. But what they did afterwards was completely disorganized. Not only they killed their masters and family, but they didn't hide the bodies. They simply, for whatever reason, whether they were in a hurry or they simply think it's a good thing to let other whites see what can happen to them, whatever the state of mind was, that's what happened. They left the body in the open. And that was a big mistake. Now, Nat Turner did have a plan. The plan was obviously to use his master's premises, location, in order to carry out the plan. And of course, needless to point out that the plan was, we're going to move north, but we will kill everyone on our path that either trying to prevent us from reaching the north or that stopping us and fighting with us. So Nat Turner had a very different mindset than the other black leaders they simply caught and executed. In all fairness, that plan was a good plan, except for one problem, that if they were hiding the bodies as they went along, they would most likely have had the chance to reach north. And by the time they reached north, then white slave owners would have found out, ha, my God, this is a big problem. But because they were leaving the bodies along the way, it was easy to alert authority and to do a search and a hunt and really find them and capture them and try them and execute them. Nat Turner and company, there were close to 60 slaves with him who were caught and executed. And Nat Turner had the right idea. If we are caught, we're going to be executed. So why not return the favor? So along the way, they were killing white slave owners and families. So they didn't die alone. They died telling the white slave owners that what you were doing was wrong. Maybe it's time to think about what you're doing to slaves. No, that's not what they did. In fact, they get even more upset that slaves try to escape and kill those who were inflicting pain on them. That's why they call blacks criminal and they call blacks violent. Because when they caught blacks trying to escape slavery, doing nothing other than trying to escape slavery, they caught them, they executed them. But the minute that a group of blacks decided, you know what, why not do the same thing they're doing to us? All of a sudden, blacks are criminal, they're violent. It's blaming the victim game. Now, there was one individual that I personally want to bring to the conversation. And his name is John Brown. John Brown is a white man, or was a white man. And he was disgusted by what whites were doing to blacks. He was disgusted by slavery. He was disgusted by everything that was going on. And it so happened John Brown, as I mentioned earlier, was also born in 1800. Connecticut, more specifically, raised in Ohio. But already at the age of 42, John Brown decided, you know what, I'm not just going to sit around and talk about how to free slavery, how to free the slaves. I'm going to do something about it. As I mentioned at the top of the program, there were always two groups of whites in the country. Those who are racist and discriminate and those who were not. John Brown happened not to have been an exception. He was among many whites who did not approve of slavery. Those people, they did not condone slavery. They were doing everything that they could in order to end slavery. But John Brown took it a step further and said, the hell with all this talk, something has to be done about this. In 1856, he went to Kansas. He confronted a group of pro-slavery white men, killed them, and then he moved back to North. Now, as I mentioned before, I don't know if he was just fleeing the scene or if he had that in plan all along. Now, Kansas, there was a city called Lawrence. That city was mostly a town that were anti-slavery individual. People were anti-slavery. That's where you found most of those individuals. That's why John Brown did travel to Kansas in 1850. He spent pretty much 6 years there. But in 1856, that's when he confronted a group of pro-slavery individuals. And he managed to kill 5 white men, and that was on May 21st. And on May 25th, on May 25th, that's when John Brown attacked those pro-slavery group. And in the process, one of his sons was killed. He had 5 sons that he enlisted to help free the slaves. Now, if you're talking about someone who was disgusted by slavery, John Brown was one of them. And during that time, as I mentioned before, the blacks weren't even aware that someone, a white individual, was actually losing, not only putting his life in jeopardy, but also losing members of his family in order to end slavery. Blacks weren't even aware of that. So after that, John Brown moves north to Maryland in a place called Harper's Ferry. He rented a place there. The place could have been strategic. It is near Virginia, where slavery started in America. So John Brown could have chosen the place for that reason. I don't know for sure, but it sounds logical. That's why he picked that very specific place. He could have moved further north, but he was in the fight. Remember, I just mentioned to you, he lost one of his sons in Kansas during a fight with the pro-slavery groups. Now, any individual who is trying to fight for a cause, after losing one of his sons, could have said, the hell with that. I'm not black. I don't have to. But he did not. He continued the fight. In Harper's Ferry, he and three of his sons, I'm not sure exactly what happened to the fourth, to the other one, because he started the process with 5. One was killed in Kansas. Now, 3 of his sons, himself, 5 black men, and 13 other people, a total of 22 people, decided we going to take on slavery. I know it was crazy. It was really illogical, especially because of the town that John Brown picked. Now, whether it was just symbolic for him, I don't know, because there is no information left by him or by anyone that could give provide some information as to his state of mind. It shows Harper's Ferry. It makes sense because it's near Virginia and it was a strategic location. That probably makes sense. But as to why he decided with just 22 men to go and attack, I'm not certain at all. And worse, it shows a place that was near an arsenal. That was completely crazy. Because it's not that he had an army of people. Only 22 men. Himself, 3 of his sons, 5 blacks, and 13 other people. Nobody in his group had any training, fighting or armed welding type of training. But all he had was the determination to fight to end slavery. Needless to point out, he didn't go far. He didn't get far. Armed personnel were dispatched. His army of 22 men were surrounded. All his 3 sons were killed. John Brown was injured. Those who were captured were tried and executed, including John Brown. Bloody rebellion. That was October of 1859. Just 6 years before Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Act. Just 4 years before the Civil War erupted. Actually, we would say just 2 years, because the Civil War really started in 1861. Just 2 years. Had John Brown waited just 2 years, he could have been part of a very large group fighting slavery. He could have been successful. But as I mentioned at the top, it just couldn't stand there and watch the type of treatment that were being inflicted on slaves. It just couldn't. And he was a white man. So we have had in the United States of America two very distinct groups of whites. Those who are racist, those who discriminate, and those who are not racist, those who do not discriminate, and those who even put their lives and the lives of their families on the line to put an end to those type of practices. And today, we still have in the United States of America two groups of whites in the country. Those who are still racist and those who are fighting to end racism in America. This is the big problem in the country. Next time, as you may already suspect it, John Brown was the last organized leader who tried to end slavery on his own. Well, of course, with some individual. 22 men, an army of 22 men. They could have seen, gee, this is crazy. We should enlist more people. We should wait for more people to join in. John Brown was the leader, and by all accounts, it looks like those who joined him were following his instruction, were going by what he was asking. In fact, he put his money where his mouth was. He enlisted 5 of his sons to join the fight. He already lost 1 in Kansas, and 3 of them were with him at the time that he decided today is the day we are going to fight those people and end slavery. Now, I can only speculate as to why he chose Harper's Ferry near an arsenal. Strategic location, not only to attack Virginia, but also places to get ammunition, to regroup, places to find weapons, to be able to, from time to time, strategically send different individuals from the group to collect weapons in order to make certain that the fight would be successful. That's just purely speculation on my part. But John Brown's eagerness to end slavery must have blinded him to the point of thinking 22 men could do that job. The whole South was white slave ownership. But on top of that, authorities were protecting the white slave owners. Authorities were enforcing slavery. So it is difficult to comprehend that John Brown imagined that 22 men could have overthrown a whole system in the South. But one thing we know for certain about John Brown, he was utterly disgusted by slavery. A white man put his life and the lives of his family on the line to end slavery, while hundreds of thousands of whites in the South were subjecting blacks to inhuman treatment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the state of race relation in America. Next time when we talk about end of slavery, we will be talking about the Civil War As mentioned, we're trying to find why we are talking about racism and discrimination in America. At this point, I give you a sense as to why white slave owners started to fear for their lives, literally, because slaves decided we're not just going to escape anymore. We are going to give the white men who are treating our families, who are treating us in that way, a taste of their own medicine. You can imagine panic in the South. It was great when they were hanging blacks just for trying to escape. It was great when they were executing them because, hey, they should have accepted their slavery. But the minute that they start getting a taste of their own medicine, they scream, my God, blacks are violent, they're criminal, we have problems. Now, if you didn't know why now whites in the South sleep with a gun, a rifle nearby, that's the reason. Because they never knew when the slave who escaped going to come back for them. Now, you didn't have to be afraid if you weren't doing anything wrong, did you? No, of course they knew, because not only they were doing wrong thing, but they still had slaves slaving for them. They still have domestic slaving for them. They still were beating them until they bled. They still were starving them. They still were working them 18 hours a day. Of course they had reason to be afraid. So they sleep with a rifle right next by, because they couldn't really be sure that the slave, the domestic that's living right in their household, the domestic would not just open the door and let the slave in to kill them. Because they heard, did you hear what happened? John Travis and family, the whole family was killed by angry, violent black slaves. You see where the sentiment started? As long as they were the one executing, hanging blacks, it was fine. That was okay. They were just fine. They're white men. They could hang blacks. They could execute blacks for no reason. But they were good people. Starving blacks to death? Oh, they're good people. They go to church. They go to school. They beat them until they bled. Oh, well, they're good people, you know. Nice family. They raise their kids. They send them to school. They were good people. But the blacks, all violent people, criminal. Have you heard? They killed the whole Travis family. What's wrong with those people? Well, they got enough of the treatment. Your ancestors did not only pass down to you wealth, did not only pass down to you businesses and lands and houses, they also passed down to you information that clearly were not correct, because they did not tell you why Nat Turner killed the whole Travis family. Of course, they missed that part, because why pass it to you? So you grew up, it was passed to your great-grandpa, who passed it down until it gets to you. The only thing you heard, that those violent, criminal slaves, black, they killed the whole Travis family. That's all you know. But did you know that John Travis got a lot of blacks executed, hung, just for trying to escape slavery? Did they tell you that? Did they pass that bit of information to you? Of course not. Did they tell you that John Travis purchased Nat Turner and beat him until he bled during his childhood? Did they tell you that John Travis starved Nat Turner until he almost died? Of course not. But the only thing you got from the conversation, from the information, that they killed the whole John Travis family. Those criminals. Now you start having an understanding as to what really happened in the South. Things don't just happen in the void. Blacks were not criminal. The very criminals were the white slave owners, because the kind of treatment they inflicted on blacks on a regular basis, they were the true criminals of the South. When blacks revolted and decided we're not just going to escape anymore, we're going to make certain that the white slave owners who inflicted this kind of treatment on us, they understand what they were doing. They're raping our women, they're selling our kids, they're beating us to death, they're scorching us and force us to work 18 hours a day. We're going to show them exactly what that was like. No, blacks were not criminal. Blacks were not thieves. Everything that whites in the South acquire, they acquire on the back of the blacks. If you are a descendant, you are enjoying the fruit of black slavery. So you cannot wash your hands and say, I have nothing to do with slavery, I wasn't there. Of course you weren't there, but your ancestor left all that for you. You didn't have to struggle, because you'll find them right there. You start getting a sense of things, why things are the way they are here in America? Well, there is more.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
I do thank you for spending the time with me, and I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. If you have any question, suggestion, criticism, well, compliment, do not hesitate to contact us and let us know. If you have a topic in mind that you would like us to research and discuss with you and for you on the Fourth Branch program, please do send us a line.
We would like to hear from you. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful weekend. I hope to see you again on Monday at 2 p.m. Good day. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events as well as to understand topics. Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the Fourth Branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment. The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.